We're going to continue where we left off and look at getting the channel strip ready for recording. Now the first thing I need to do is set the input and output field. I need to tell this channel strip which input from my audio interface I want it to record from. So I'm going to click here in this I/O field here. The top field is for input and the second is for output. I'm going to click hold on the input and I'm going to select an input, and I want to use this one here, input 4, which you'll see the name next to it, Octopre number 2. So I'm going to set it to that, and I want to explain to you how I've named these. There's two places in Logic you can go to set up names for your inputs and outputs and bus sends, and that'll control how they're displayed here in these fields. You can get to it from Audio, I/O labels, or the same thing in the mixer under Options, I/O labels. So let's open that up and look at this. Now here you get a representation of all the physical inputs and outputs on your audio interface, plus bus sends, and you can name them. Now these are the default names provided by the driver for the interface, in my case the Motu 828 Mark II, and these are the custom names that I've typed in. So input 4, for example, I might want to double click there and type in vocal and dismiss it by hitting return, and then when I close this, you'll see here now it says vocal next to input 4. So that's how you can customize the way names appear in these flip menus. So let me go back to that. I want to set it back, I/O labels, just for my own personal consistency. And I'm going to call this Octopre, which refers to the 8-channel preamp that I'm using, Octopre 2. Now, the other thing we can do is name buses, which we're going to look at in a moment, but I have by default, I've named bus 16 master bus, and I've named bus 8 verb, and bus 7 phones. And again, I can click there if I want to have it display the default driver name, or there if I wanted to just display bus 7. But I'm going to leave them at my custom names that I've double-clicked and entered there. And we'll look at those in a moment when they come up. So there I've set my input to be input 4 of my audio interface, which is connected up to the second channel of my Octopre. Now the output I have defaulting to the stereo output setting, which is a unique setting in Logic 9. I'm going to show you how this works in a moment. But I have here a choice of all the physical outputs on my interface, or surround output, or the specific mono outputs. But I'm going to leave it at stereo output and show you where this is set. Under the preferences, go to audio, and then under I/O assignment, you can set here where you want the default stereo output to route the signal to. And this is useful for when you're moving sessions around between different studios with different interfaces. Right now it's defaulting to output 1, 2, which is where I want it. But let's say I can have it sent to output 3, 4 and put on mirroring so that it'll go to output 1, 2 as well, which is useful if I have 2 pairs of monitors hooked up. But for now I'm going to leave that off, and I'm going to set it back to the default output 1, 2, which is where I want it. And once we have this open, I want to show you another setting here that pertains to recording. When we go back to the General tab, there's a checkbox here for low latency mode. Now when this is enabled, what it'll do is bypass any plugins on the channel strip or in the chain of the signal flow that induce latency so that you can record with minimal latency. And it'll bypass them and reduce them to allow the latency to not exceed the value that you have set here. This default is 5 milliseconds. So with this on, if I had a bunch of complex plugins, it would bypass them when recording so that the latency would not exceed 5 milliseconds. I'm going to leave that off for now, but it's important to know how that works. All right, let's look at setting up some sends and effects. I'm going to hide this triangle here to show more room on the channel strip. Now, what we want to do is we want to set up reverb so that the singer can hear some reverb in her headphones. I want to set up a send effect to send to a bus where I'm going to have reverb. Now, I want you to watch closely what happens here. I'm going to click hold and set up a send to a bus. I'm going to set it to bus 8, which is just one that I've chosen for my own personal uses to be one that I generally use for reverb, but it could easily be any bus. But I'm going to set it up to bus 8 and watch what happens. It automatically generated a new aux track over here with that bus set to the input. So here's the send set up, going to bus 8, and in the mixer, there's now a new auxiliary channel strip that's been created with the input set to be bus 8. Now this is the way signal routing works for send effects in Logic. Now these dual channel strips here affect this. The channel strip on the right will display the destination of the send when this is highlighted, And when this is highlighted down here, it sets the destination, or displays rather, the destination of this field here, the stereo output. So this is a great way to access the destination of the signal routing on these channel strips. So if I have a bunch of sends set up, I can click here and get access immediately to the channel strip that has this reverb set up on it. Or if I click on another one, there's no send set up right now, but let's say I'm going to set another one up to go to a headphone mix. If I click there and another one was created here, I can now display the destination of this send, headphones. So verb, it's displaying this verb, aux1, and I click on phones and it's displaying aux2 for phones. So very useful the way this updates. It makes it unnecessary to have the mixer open. You can do a lot of the basic setup like this. Let's deinstantiate that for now. I'm going to go back to no send, and let's work with the reverb. So a couple of notes about this. It defaults to setting it post-fader, meaning that the value that I dial up by means of this knob here is going to be dependent on the level of the fader. So if I have this set there and I dial the fader down, it's going to send less to this bus or more depending on where the fader is. But if I have it set to pre-fader, the amount sending here is independent of where I have this level setting, and it changes colors to illustrate that it's in pre-fader send mode. The third option is for post-pan. Now by default, the send routes the signal to the middle of the stereo field, but when it's set to post-pan, it'll respect the panning and send it respectively. Now I can reset these values by option clicking. I'm going to option click there to set that back to unity level, and option click there to get it back to the default. And if I option click on a send, it sets it to a unity send level of about 2 o'clock. But you can dial the amount that you want to send like that, and you can see the amount being displayed there that you're dialing. So that's how you send a portion of this signal to that bus through bus 8, where it arrives at this auxiliary and gets processed with what's on this aux track. So let's insert a reverb here so that we can get some reverb happening. I'm going to go to our plugins by clicking in the insert field here. I'm going to click in the top insert field, and I'm going to go to reverb, and I'm going to choose Space Designer. And by default, this sent this to a mono bus, but I want to make this a stereo bus because I want to hear stereo reverb. So I'm going to click the interlinked circle button there and turn it to a stereo track. And now click on the insert field, go to reverb, Space Designer, and call up a stereo instance of Space Designer, which is Logic's flagship reverb plugin. I'm not even going to bother calling up a preset. I'm just going to leave it at the default setting for now. And I'm going to close this up. And now we know that as we dial in signal here, a portion of this channel strip's audio is being sent to bus 8, which is arriving at this auxiliary and is getting processed with this reverb, and then is continuing on its journey to the stereo output. So it all gets summed together at the stereo output. So here's the mixer button. The reverb is being sent, going to aux1. If I scroll up there, you'll see the Space Designer. And let's name this. Let's call it reverb. A little bit more of a descriptive name. And then it's continuing on its journey and meeting up with the original signal at the stereo output over here. Now there's one more thing I want to show you in this video, and that's pertaining to that low latency mode. I want to go back and put it on momentarily, audio, and in the general tab. When this is enabled, another field appears here in the sends. When I click hold here, there's now a little checkbox for low latency safe, so that I can choose to specifically exclude this routing from being bypassed in this low latency mode. So again, important to know how that works. I'm leaving this off for now, and with it off, you'll see that that feature is no longer there. So let's leave that off, but useful to know that you can override the low latency mode bypassing by means of that low latency safe button. So that's it for this video. Stay tuned. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to set up a headphone send, and we're going to get ready to record the singer after that.